Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
There's always this joke in the United States about the space program, the Russians and the Americans. And the Americans spent almost $500,000 trying to figure out some way for the astronauts to be able to write and take notes in zero gravity. And it had to be a pen that wouldn't leak, and it had to be able to be used in any position and was zero gravity. And they did prototypes, and they worked it all out over and over again. And then they asked the Russians what they're doing, and the Russians said, "We use a pencil."
Now, is that a myth or is that a true story?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. It sounds like a myth, but it also sounds very telling of the situation, doesn't it? Okay, so we're going to get started?
I was thinking of having that part of it. No, but I thought we started already.
As you wish.
Okay,
yeah. No, you can leave that in there, whatever you want to do.
Well, yeah, we segued into myths pretty much. Go ahead, Ron. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Bidzina is the technical guy here. He's the electronics genius, and he's the one who's doing all this extra stuff. But, of course, you also know he's a beekeeper. So it's Ron Miksha, that's me, and Bidzina Mosashvili. And is that close?
Mosiashvili.
Mosiashvili.
Yeah.
Still didn't get it, did I?
Or in Georgian, it would be Mosiashvili. Mosiashvili.
Mosiashvili.
Bidzina Mosiashvili.
Okay.
Mosiashvili.
I'll call you Bidzi.
Mosiashvili. Or Shvili, I don't know. It's more Shvili than Shvili. Shvili.
Shvili.
Yeah, Shvili, yeah.
Almost like a W sound in my ear.
That kind of a little bit, yeah, that's because there's some letters. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about bees and culture and various curiosities over the next hour and some minutes. And it is Ron Miksha, that's me, and my good friend, Bidzina. And Bidzina, what are we talking about today?
Today, oh my God. Today we're going to be talking about myths and legends of beekeeping.
Okay, and are there some?
I thought there was none.
Well, we're going to find out for sure. I think there are quite a few.
I thought beekeepers were I thought they were the most honest people out there. Is that?
Well, beekeepers are honest. Yeah, as honest as the average person.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they don't have a monopoly on honesty, but they're also not the most crooked, evil people on earth. They're close sometimes, but not so much. Okay, so modern myths and legends. In other words, what are people talking about today, particularly on the internet? That's where we did a little bit of our research just to see what kind of stories people are telling each other when it comes to bees. So we're starting off with this one. This is an image that was from Facebook from just a little while ago. It was this spring, 2024, and people are still kind of pushing the idea that Einstein once said that if the bees go extinct, man will be dead in 4 years. Now, we don't believe that, and one reason I don't believe it, and I see what you think about this, but there are a lot of parts of the world where there are humans living, and living quite well, where there aren't any bees. You know, if you think of some islands, you think of the Arctic, the Inuit people in the far north of Canada, and then, of course, other indigenous people around the world in the far north. There aren't flowers, there are very few bees, and they're still surviving, they're living, so we can't all be dead in 4 years if the bees disappeared. What do you think?
Just to put everything in context, so the full quote that's being thrown around is, we have a picture up here for the audio audience, is if the honeybee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would have only 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man.
And who said that?
Albert Einstein.
I doubt it. But that is what we hear, don't we?
Yeah, that's
and we
right.
hear that a lot, and we hear it even now.
And sorry, you found this picture.
Yeah.
It says there, Bee Day, May 20th, 2024.
Yeah. So World Bee Day was just a few weeks before we recorded this, and it's 2024, so it's not old myths. These are still floating around, and somebody had posted it, and they were really proud of that fact. And so, what does the public generally think? Well, here's an example. This is from CBC, the most trusted name in broadcasting in Canada. That's up for discussion.
So they also made an article about this. Oh, wow. So is this, they literally made Einstein's words of warning.
Yeah.
It's like he's like a scholarly source.
That's right. That's right. If Einstein said it, then you know it's got to be true. So where this came from was there were a couple of people just 3-4 years ago who were trying to raise funding for a project of theirs. And they got the CBC involved to get them some recognition, so people would know what they're up to. And the reporter who went out just basically took the words of the person they were interviewing it and made a big headline, Einstein's words of warning. And the words of warning are, the day the last bee dies, humanity will have just about 4 years left to live. Now, this is the reporter quoting somebody who is quoting, in this case, Einstein and not Einstein. I mean, this is pretty sloppy reporting from CBC. They misspelled it. They misspelled Einstein's name. I mean, okay, all right. So that's one example.
Wait, is this what taxpayer dollars are going to?
Yeah, some of our money goes to this, but I'm not. I mean, I have to tell you this. I grew up in the States, and I came up to Canada when I was about 20 years old, and came up on my own in order to keep bees. So my first introduction to Canadian culture was a CBC radio, because where I lived, it was the only radio station I could get. And I remember listening to people like Peter Zowski, who was like this talk radio guy who interviewed people, and very soothing, intellectual voice that told me all about the fishermen in Newfoundland and the lumberjacks in BC, and being a farm kid from the eastern United States. I mean, that for me, I'm glad that we had that national broadcaster. Now, there are reasons to kind of wonder if they're holding their own anymore. I don't want to discuss that today. We can bring that back, but for now, let's just say they made a big mistake on this one.
No, I'll take it.
Okay. So just to see if CBC was right or wrong, I of course did a Google search, and in just a few microseconds, I came up with 1.2 million results. And the question was, honeybees disappear from Earth, humans dead within 4 years. I typed that in, and then I came up with, according to Albert Einstein, and then another one according to Albert Einstein, and according to Albert Einstein, and then I collected all of these memes. I mean, there's so many memes out there. If you ever wander around in the untidy parts of the internet, you'll find Albert quoted over and over again. So how does he feel about it? Well, look at what he said. He himself said, maybe someday people will attribute false, fake quotes to me, but I hope not. Of course, he didn't really say that. I wrote that for him. But
look at that.
But it's believable, isn't it? Because Einstein said it. So yeah, we have this issue, and things would be really different if the bees disappeared from the face of the earth. I mean, as it's been pointed out, without bees, not all the flowers and plants will disappear. Like, there are a lot of self-pollinated plants. I mean, wheat, rice, they don't benefit from honeybees. So people would still be able to eat that. So there's most of the grasses are wind pollinated and so on. So it's not true that people would automatically disappear, except if you stop to think about this. What would make the honeybees disappear? And whatever that event is, if it's, some sort of climate change or some chemical accident, nuclear weapons, whatever it's going to be, then we can be pretty sure that if all the bees die, then people probably will be dead before we know it. So there is that truth, but it's not related to the idea that without bees we would all disappear.
So there's actually you mentioned that it was a marketing campaign, that this quote?
Sort of, kind of, sort of. So what happened is there was as typically happens around the world, there was a beekeepers' riot. The beekeepers were protesting the low prices they were receiving and imports of honey. Well, this took place in Europe. It took place in the country of Belgium. And when it took place around 1994, 95, then the French beekeepers, they were in strong support of their fellow beekeepers that were rioting in Belgium. So they published a pamphlet. And in that pamphlet, whoever wrote it, they wrote that Einstein said if all the bees disappear, then in 4 years, to the people gone. How did that happen? So I use Snopes, and a few other trusted sources on the internet, at least semi-trusted, to try to get a better perspective to see, okay, what is happening? Where did that quote come from? Who invented it? And the best that I could come up with was that there was a really bright guy named Maurice Maeterlinck. And Maeterlinck was a really interesting philosopher, writer, beekeeper who did say something to the effect that without bees, people would have a hard time surviving. Well, he was from Belgium. The bee riots were in Belgium. And, here you got a guy who is really smart, who won the Nobel Prize in literature. But not that many people have heard of him compared to Albert Einstein, who's also very smart and won a Nobel Prize, in his case in physics. So it just probably wasn't too big of a leap to just change the name from Maeterlinck to Einstein and give you just that little extra creed, yeah.
So someone did say that.
Kind of, yep, and
Okay.
that was Maeterlinck. He did say something, not 4 years. He didn't put a date or date line on it, but he did think that without bees, people are doomed, and so that's fair enough. Certainly, things would change a lot. Like I couldn't imagine, waking up in a world without bees. I mean, first of all, I'd have to get a different hobby.
So our honeybee, yeah, that's true. We don't have a podcast anymore. But
no, we'd still be talking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How about there's no more bees?
Yeah, that's what we talk about over and over again. So what are you going to say?
I was going to say so the honeybee it's a domesticated bee?
Right.
So
semi-domesticated.
Are there wild honeybees?
Yeah. Yes, there are. And some of those wild honeybees can live inside your beehive. So it depends on how you define domesticated and wild. We tend to call honeybees like livestock,
yes.
Like semi-domesticated.
Right.
So here's the thing for people who don't know. You can put out a hive of bees in the yard, and the bees are totally free. They can stay or they can leave. They can take off. They can go live somewhere else. We don't really own them. We hope they come back, and they tend to come back because what we provide to them is a comfortable house. It's safe and clean and dark inside and the right size, so they make it their home. But they're free to leave. That's a little different from sheep or cattle. You don't want them to disappear. They won't come back. Well, they might come back.
Someone's probably gonna.
Yeah.
have them for dinner.
Well, I guess they could. Yeah. But honeybees then are the bee that we're mostly talking about on this. But by extension, there are about 20,000 different species of bees in the world.
Right. And honeybee is one of them.
Honeybee is one species.
And underneath the honeybee umbrella, there's many honeybees. There's many honeybee subspecies.
Yeah, there are. There are many. There are maybe 20, 25 subspecies or races, are sometimes called, of honeybees. So the honeybees originated in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe.
I see.
So
that ability where they, or not ability, or when they sting and they die on sting, when they fly away, is that a evolved trait that they have, or is that something that they've always had, and then us humans specifically pick that insect? Because we don't want an insect that can sting over and over again. We kind of want an insect that can defend itself.
Gotcha.
But it's not necessarily doesn't want to.
That's right. But and the bumblebee can sting over and over again.
Right.
So the bees developed their stingers millions and millions and millions of years before humans came along.
That was there.
Yeah, that was already there.
Huh.
And so bumblebees can sting multiple times, but that's not the reason people don't keep like bumblebees are not generally kept for honey, because bumblebees only make a thimbleful of honey, and just for their immediate use.
Just for their immediate use.
Honeybees have a whole different society, different setup, so they need to produce a lot of honey and store it, and they will typically produce a lot more honey than they need to live on. And the reason they store it is because they have a colony of maybe 10 or 20,000 bees that will live throughout the whole winter. And those bees have to eat something. Honeybees.
Oh, honey. Oh,
yeah.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah, and the bumblebees is quite different. So with the bumblebees, only one bee in the fall will fly out, I shouldn't say just one. In the fall, a bumblebee nest will produce several queen bees, and they will leave the nest and find somewhere to hibernate by themselves. And they don't need to have a reserve of food. They'll just be in a kind of they will be dormant. They will be hibernating. They'll be in a type of stasis that they don't need to eat until the weather gets warm and the flowers are blooming again. If they come out too soon and there are no flowers, they could starve to death. So the timing has to be really good. But yeah.
And bumblebees don't exist in Europe?
Yes, they do.
Oh,
they do exist in Europe. Yep. Not so much in Africa because bumblebees are a cold weather creature.
Cold weather creature.
Yeah, that's why they have so much hair and they're big and heavy and
that's another evolved thing that I was going to ask. So honeybees, that kind of fuzzy trait that they have. Yeah. Is that from a long time ago as well?
Yes. So that developed, and to be kind of complete in our little side discussion here, the bumblebees and the honeybees, all originally, and ants, all originally evolved from wasps. Maybe not the ants. I might be speaking out of turn.
I think the wasps came from ants. So ants are the OG.
Okay,
that's what I know. That's from what, because wasps are they're cousin of ants.
Okay,
they look alike. It's just wasps fly.
Yeah, there are some other differences too, of course.
Right.
But
that was a very general.
But
they look alike. If you look, they're like they both have that menacing.
Come on now, ants are not menacing.
Well, under the microscope they are.
Yeah, that's true. They look like creatures from outer space or something like that. But so
another episode we could do, just microscopic
We'll
bugs.
talk about that another day. So let's go back to the time that there were wasps, and the wasps are the ancestors of some of the of other species. Some of those other species continued to be wasps throughout history with some modifications depending on where they were living so they could live more effectively. But some wasps, which are carnivorous, decided to be vegetarian, and they started to eat the pollen from flowers. And also, just to kind of complete this, because I don't want to leave this one little factor hanging, we talked about, the honeybees. So there are, I think, 7 species of honeybees in the world. So these species cannot mate between themselves. So they're all called honeybees, but there's a stingless honeybee in South America and in Brazil and in Central America and in Thailand. There are these huge bees that do sting, that are honeybees and make honey in the mountains of Tibet and so on. But our bee that we're most familiar with is the honeybee. And when people like Einstein say something about, the bees disappearing, most people have it in their mind, it's that honeybee.
Yes.
Yeah, that Bidzina has 100 colonies of, or will soon have 100 colonies of.
Yeah, so let's say all the bees were to disappear. Then what?
Okay,
now we're in trouble.
Now we got 20,000 species of bees all disappearing overnight.
Right.
And yeah, we're in big trouble because...
what does that look like?
Well, we still would have rice and wheat and, a lot of grains, and we'd have grass to feed cattle, and but we wouldn't have... most of our fruits would be gone. So we wouldn't be as healthy. And most of the most interesting, nicest tasting foods are, the fruits that were pollinated by one type of bee or another, honeybees or other bees.
I'm going to ask here, Gemini, do you know Google Gemini? That's their
Google, okay, so
ChatGPT thing.
Okay, so it's an AI, artificial intelligence.
It's an AI large language model.
Okay,
that's connected to the internet.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask it. We can rephrase this question better, but I'm going to say, what would it look like if all bee species disappeared on Earth?
So it might be creating another myth.
It's like a hypothetical.
Let's see the answer. It might say all humans will die within 4 years, because that's all over the internet, and that's where the AI is getting its sources, isn't it?
Yes, and it also is drawing upon spontaneous...
it's creating answers for us.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us what you got.
Okay, so it's given us a list here. So number 1, crop failures and food shortages. Obviously, bees are essential. So without bees, many crops would fail. Ecological collapse. Many wild plants depend on bees for pollination. Loss of biodiversity. Bees play a crucial role in maintaining biodiversity. Economic consequences, human health impacts. The loss of bee population crops would significantly affect human nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Diets would become less diverse, lacking in essential vitamins and minerals. This would lead to increased health problems, malnourishment, and more prone to diseases, and social and political unrest due to scarcity of food and economic instability. This sounds like the movie I just watched.
What's that? What movie?
Mad Max?
Yeah.
From the 70s?
Yeah.
Did you watch the 70s one?
No.
So
but go ahead.
They
I
made
know of it.
They made a remade, Mad Max Fury Road. That was the first one, but the second one just got released. Furiosa. It was 4D.
Okay.
So have you seen a 4D movie before?
No.
You might actually really like it.
The chair will shake.
The chair shakes, and they have smell. They had so there were scenes of dead bodies. And it would be this weird, nauseous smell that they would release. I don't know why they would do that.
I could pass on that.
Well, that was it was just an odd feature. That it was one scene that they did, but they had other scenes where there was like a forest, and it would be this luscious tropical smell, and mist you would get sprayed by it. But the movie is in the future, and they have everybody's looking for this. Like it's just barren land. There's no water, and there's few pockets of paradise
And no bees.
Well, the scene starts with Furiosa. She's a young girl, and she's in her homeland in this little pocket of paradise, and there's bees flying around in a peach orchard. I don't know if there were bees. There was something buzzing. It was bugs flying around, but it was obviously they were trying to go at that there's life here. And then she gets taken away, and it's a cruel movie.
Okay, thanks for the heads up. I'm not watching it, and that was just, we missed giving the spoiler alert for everybody who's listening to us. But
sorry.
So now you know.
But this sounds like so. If bees died, then we'd have that
we would have
Furiosa.
Absolutely. There's no question that it would be a mess. Humans would survive. We wouldn't all die in 4 years, but it would be a mess. I mean, it'd be like Waterworld, Kevin Costner or something, traveling around on a boat with fruit. Anyhow, the background to the Einstein kind of quote is that, big trouble without bees. Big trouble, but Einstein didn't say it. Einstein didn't know much about bees. He knew a lot about a lot of things, but he was not an entomologist. He was not an ecologist. He was a mathematical physicist, and so I think in the end that Einstein was being used. He died in 1955, and the quote became famous since 1994. So he'd been dead for 40 years before his quote kind of surfaced, and people have gone through like his library is at the Jerusalem University. They keep all of his papers, all of it, and people have specifically gone page by page to look for some references to bees because this meme was so popular and was not found. So let's say that didn't happen.
I don't think it did happen. You're right. And, now while we're on the kind of the little line of Albert Einstein, there's actually a list of quotes that people attribute to him.
Okay.
Should we just go through a couple of them?
Give me some, yeah. What else did he say besides we're all going to die?
Right. So there's let me pull this up here. So that one quote where he said, I don't know how World War III is going to look like, but World War IV is going to be fought with sticks and stones or something like that.
Okay.
Do you know which quote I'm talking about?
I do, yeah, and you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, I don't think he said that one.
Okay.
But I can't seem to find, but there's 13, these are 13 quotes that he did not say. So number one, evil is the result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. So he didn't say that.
He didn't say that. He might have thought that, though.
Yeah. I mean, it is a nice thought. It comes from this gem comes from a 1990 viral email about a student challenging a professor about the nature and source of evil.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to get an A, the student, he or she, decided to quote Einstein.
I guess so.
Okay.
But let me just do another one.
Yeah.
Just to circle up. Yeah. So you do not. So he said, you do not really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandmother. He never said that.
No,
did he? Is that? I've never heard these ones.
You've
heard that one before?
No, I haven't. I had never heard that one before.
Okay. Oh, this one's a good one. This one, people say this all the time. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I genuinely thought he said that. Apparently he didn't.
Okay.
So So everyone from Mark Twain to Benjamin Franklin is purportedly responsible for this phrase.
And you just said it. So someday they'll be quoting you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that and so
one more, then we circle back to the bees.
So if everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty good, isn't it?
I mean, that is a good one, but he never said that. And that is actually a one that gets thrown out often as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that is kind of sad to think that we want to judge people a certain way, and by our own measure of what makes a person smart or not smart. Yeah.
Right. Okay, this is the last one. The average human only uses 10% of his brain. He didn't say that.
He didn't say. I hope he didn't, because we know now at least that we use pretty much the whole thing in one way or another. Yeah. So that's Einstein. So what do you think? In general, do you think bees are going extinct?
I don't think honeybees are.
No.
I think they're doing pretty good.
You got that nailed.
Yeah.
So if we look at a kind of the numbers over a period of time, like over the last 60 years or so.
Sorry. So what are we looking at here, Ron?
Well, we do have a graph up for those who are simply listening on the podcast portion. We have a graph that shows the number of colonies of bees by the millions since around 1960 to pretty close to the present. And since 1960, the worldwide population of honeybees has doubled. There were about 50 million kept colonies. Now, there are a lot of wild colonies. Those are colonies that swarm and escape and live in the wild. But among the kept colonies, the ones we can count, and this counting was done by the United Nations Foreign Agricultural Organization, or Farm and FAO or FOA, I don't know, but they did the counting, and they looked at every country in the world and asked for censuses, and what they discovered was it's been pretty much a gradual year-by-year increase in the number of kept colonies of honeybees from around 50 million 60 years ago to around 100 million today, actually. It's closing in on 100 million. So our numbers have gone up a lot over that time.
Do they know which areas? Is this just a world average, or do they know some areas have gone up more than others? Obviously, most likely, but is there a list for that? Is there?
Yeah, you can do a search of
which has gone up the most.
Yeah. And the United Nations will provide those statistics for free, and you can download them, and you can play around and create your own graphs.
Oh, this is the United Nations, okay.
Yeah. So that's basically what I did is I created a graph just so I can visually look at it and say, okay, are we going up or are we going down as far as honeybees are concerned? So the whole idea of doing fundraising to save the bees when you talk about honeybees is kind of it's not necessary, because honeybees are a kept animal, semi-domesticated, that we need and provide us with a lot of utility. They provide a few billion pounds of honey every year that people eat, so that's certainly a good thing. But more than that, it's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of industrial agriculture particularly in fruits and vegetables for pollination that they are directly responsible for. Okay.
No, so they are very important, and they're not really. But what about the native? Is there any issues with them?
Yeah, we are worried about that.
Or should they even be called? Why are we using the term native bees?
Okay, in some parts of the world, the honeybee is not the typical Western honeybee that we're used to, and produces most of our honey, does most of our pollination that's done commercially. In most of those parts of the world, the honeybee is not native. That means it was brought from North Africa, or Africa in general, or the Middle East, or from Europe, and brought to Australia and New Zealand and North and South America, and lately into areas in the Far East, like Thailand has a lot of the honeybees from North America, from Europe, and the area, like in China, they keep a lot of Western honeybees. So
even there, it was brought.
Yeah. So in China and Thailand and other parts of like India and other parts of Asia, there is a native honeybee. It's called Apis cerana. Ours is Apis mellifera, and there's quite a difference between them. You can keep the cerana bee inside of a beehive, but it has to be a little smaller hive. Otherwise, the bees can't defend it and work as well. So they build a smaller population,
Right.
the Asian bee,
Okay.
and they make less honey. So a lot of beekeepers are replacing their native Chinese or native Indian or native Thailand or Vietnamese bees with the Western honeybee, which is not native to their area. So get back to your question now. It is a bit of a misnomer because in a way, the honeybee, since it's native to England and Germany and the Middle East and so on, then we can't say the honeybees are putting the native bees out of business in those parts of the world because they were already there.
Right, and the honeybee is pollinating or getting nectar from flowers that are from Europe.
Right.
They're not even
right.
touching the native flowers.
Well, I can't say they're not touching them, but they certainly don't work them anywhere near to the extent that they will work plants that originated in Europe or North Africa
Right.
and so on. Yeah.
So if the interference comes in more of like we don't want to put too many bees in one area rather than they're eating their flowers or something like that.
That's a good point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You're right. You're right. That is the issue. We're going to move on, if it's okay, and kind of move away from Einstein go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think so. I was kind of counting, but I think we broke like 3 myths there. So one of them is the Einstein, well, a bunch of Einstein quotes, but
Right.
the one about the bees.
Yeah.
But then the second one is the, did we talk about honey doesn't expire?
No, but we are going to talk about that right away. But one of the others that we did mention was
honeybees are not, they're not wild.
Yeah, and also the extinction thing.
Right, exactly. So they're not going extinct.
No.
Right.
No.
So those are 3 big things that are kind of that's all people tell me anytime I mention bees are not going extinct.
Right, honeybees.
Honeybees are not going extinct.
Yep. But you just mentioned about how long honey lasts, and that's another one of the really big issues that people continually talk about, the fact that honey will keep forever.
Right.
And have you ever had any old honey that you've had kicking around?
I actually have had about, I would say it's about 14-year-old honey.
Okay.
So a friend of mine, he's from Sundre. His grandpa was a beekeeper.
Sundre is in
Alberta. Sorry, Sundre, Alberta. It's central Alberta.
Okay.
And they have a pretty good beekeeping community there. And from what I understand, not too much canola. So the honey there is good.
Okay.
And his grandpa was a beekeeper, passed away in 2007 or 2009. I'm not recalling exactly, but around, let's say 2009.
Okay.
He had a bunch of honey left over in buckets, left at his farmhouse. And then 2 years ago, my friend, he knew that he found out that I was a beekeeper. We met 4 years ago, and then whatever. He brought this honey from his farm to my house to help me process it. So it's been sitting in like this plastic ice cream buckets.
Yeah.
For 14 years. And it was really good.
It was.
And it was kind of liquid. I was surprised. That hadn't fully crystallized yet.
Was part of it crystallized and part of it not?
Yeah, part of it was still crystallized. Yeah, part of it was crystallized. And I'm like, is there maybe corn syrup? No, but it was good honey, and it was soft.
Yeah.
The crystallized stuff was soft.
Yeah.
So 14 years,
Yeah, so that's good, and honey will certainly last a few decades. You know how to store it to keep it as fresh as possible.
I don't.
Yeah. So what you want to do is the lids have to be on really tight. And you mentioned ice cream buckets, and for the Americans listening, that will be a new concept because ice cream isn't sold in buckets in the U.S. But here in Canada, it was pretty common. We've gone more to the cartons, but they used to be
tall ones too.
Yeah. So they hold about 4 liters or
Yeah.
or roughly a gallon of ice cream. And it would be in a bucket that you could freeze, and then you take it out of the plastic bucket.
Yeah.
Yep. And the lid doesn't fit on as tightly as you'd like. Like it does have a little bit of a breathing room there. And since you mentioned the moisture, I would sort of think that the honey was able to absorb some moisture from the atmosphere because it can do that. So
since it was open a little bit.
Yeah, just enough that it could breathe, and it probably got some moisture in.
It was like stored in the barn too, from what I understand.
Okay. So that's
maybe
not
snow got on it, or
it could
rain
be, huh?
or
Yeah. But you say you could still eat it.
Well, it was good. It was good stuff, and
sure.
we ate it, and then I helped him process. He put it. He put it into jars. He gave it to his Christmas presents to all the family members, and he's like, "Here's Grandpa's honey." Because he was, I think, 15, 16 at the time when his grandpa passed away. Maybe even he's my age, and this was 2009. So I was
Yeah. You're just a kid. I keep forgetting that. But that's totally
Perfect,
totally possible and fine. But what about 3,000 years old?
Well, I would imagine. So I consulted with the robot again, and this is. So it's while honey can remain edible for extended periods of time, the claim that 3,000-year-old honey being perfectly edible is likely a myth. It's more probable that ancient honey would be crystallized and potentially contaminated, making it unsuitable for consumption.
Yeah.
So if it's crystallized and not contaminated, then I think you could essentially make it liquid again. Somehow, but if it's contaminated, then you can't uncontaminate it.
Right.
And honey is
You were asking about storage conditions, and so the ancient Egyptians tended to keep their honey in clay pots or jars, and those jars, since the claim is that here's the claim that honey from 3,340 years ago was dug up from King Tut's tomb, and it tasted as good as new and as good as ever. That's the claim. That's the claim. And when I saw that, I thought, man, they must have produced some pretty crappy honey back in those days if it was as good as it was.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. But is this a picture of something with honey?
Yeah. So this is how they were keeping the bees. So those are hives in clay beehives, and you'd open up the back of the clay beehive in ancient Egypt, and take a knife and dig out part of the honey and leave the bees alone.
Oh, I see.
So
kind of like a step or a steep. Okay.
Yep. So
Skep.
It's kind of like a skep.
Yeah.
And so no movable parts, no combs. You just dig in there and take out a chunk.
Right.
And that's how they harvested it. And when they harvested it, then they stuck it inside of these jars. And then the rumor, or the myth is that honey never goes bad. And so it's easy for people to believe this, I think, because first of all, honey is so good, and it is healthy, and it's it's a good product. Period. It's just good, but people can be, you tend to want to believe things that you might read in the National Geographic or the Smithsonian magazine. You know what the Smithsonian is? That's the museums in the U.S.
I watch their YouTube stuff.
Okay.
But I haven't seen any of their TV. Are they on TV or
or
are they more like a book kind of? I haven't really read it.
So Smithsonian is named after a guy with that name, and he paid for the first American national museums. back, 200 years ago or so.
I see.
And
this goes way back.
Yeah, and if you go down to Washington, D.C., and you walk along the mall, which is the big green open space that goes like from the Capitol building to the White House and so on, and along that way, you'll find a number of museums that all have the name Smithsonian. So it'd be like the Smithsonian Aerospace Museum or the Smithsonian Natural Museum, where you walk in and there might be a big mammoth or something like that found in North America, things like that. And then the Smithsonian started putting out a magazine, and I thought, yeah, it's a good magazine. It's got a lot of information in there. But as soon as you read something that's totally bogus, like this story that they published a few years ago that said that honey has an eternal shelf life, and they published that into this science magazine. So, you're looking at that and you're saying, well, and this is a myth that's all over the world. So the headline for the Smithsonian article was "The Science Behind Honey's Eternal Shelf Life." And then they go into the fact that, okay, the science is that honey has some antibiotic properties and that honey stays fresh and this and that. And very little science actually in the article. They kept stressing the idea that they dug up some honey out of King Tut's tomb and they could eat it as honey. And then, you look on the internet. I mean, I was in Europe a few years ago and I saw this article in a Hungarian newspaper, and it said the same thing. It said honey, 3,000 years old, good as new. Italians, magazines had the same information, misinformation. Honey never goes bad.
So the stuff that they found out of King Tut's tomb, what was it?
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay, we'll get to that.
We're going to get to that in just a minute.
Earlier I cut you off. You mentioned something about, they must have made a really good honey if it tastes good now.
No, and they must have made a really crappy honey back in the ancient days. If somebody's going to come along and say, oh, this just tastes as fresh and good as when it was new, well, it wasn't fresh or good. And, the archaeologists did discover something that looked like honey, but they actually needed a chemical lab to decide whether or not it was honey. Right. It was that far removed from anything looking or tasting good. So no. Just briefly, the best university in all of Canada is McGill. It's in Montreal, and they ran this story. Same thing. Says that that honey is going to keep good. It's going to be good forever. They're wrong. Yeah. They're wrong. Another mistake.
And it was King Tut's sweet tooth.
Tut's sweet tooth. Oh yeah. That's right. I did want to spend a second on that. So you see, that's all imagination, extrapolation, a few details, a few facts. And now we think that King Tut had a sweet tooth because why else would they bury him with some honey?
Were the Egyptians obsessed with beehives and honeys? Were they one of those civilizations where they had the obsession?
Yeah, I would say they were. Okay. They used pictures, images of bees, like on royal seals, like when they melt wax and mark a scroll or something, so that nobody's tampered with it. They engraved it on a lot of like tombs and so on. Have pictures of and they even painted beekeepers at work and so on. Something really kind of on the side that I think is really fascinating is that in Greek. Ancient Greek history, say about 2,500 years ago or so, they believed that the bees went out and gathered the nectar off of the flowers as if it were dew, that they would go around and collect it off of grass, off of trees, and bring back this sweet substance and turn it into honey. They didn't have the idea that it actually came from flowering plants, and you had to have flowers in bloom at the same time that you've got nectar coming into the hive. They figured it was something to do with the gods spreading a kind of a mist or a fog that was sweet, and when that settled.
Oh, right. I've heard that this is they thought that it was the gods.
Nectar of the gods.
Semen or some.
Oh, and let's not go there.
Okay,
I don't think they actually believe that. But they did believe that
when it rained, didn't they think that it was
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the life would come from rain,
Right.
So they're
right.
like, this must be God's life. God, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be
Very
could
odd.
be.
It was
Well,
Pisces. I thought Pisces was in the ocean,
yeah,
or with
Pisces.
whatever the guy
Yeah,
his name was.
yeah. Well, there's
Poseidon.
Poseidon.
I
okay,
thought that.
yeah.
I thought. I
Yeah.
didn't know he was in the sky too.
Oh yeah, I think some of the gods were everywhere. Zeus was the king, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was God.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know my mythology very well, and I often confuse the Roman and Greek.
Me too. I know it's very odd. I don't know which one came first.
Well, the Greeks did.
Greeks came.
Yeah, the Greeks were earlier. But what I was going to say is this about the Egyptians. So the Greeks had an idea of where nectar and honey come from, gathered by the bees, because you could find it in a beehive, so it must be gathered by the bees, and coming from the nectar of the gods, the ambrosia, this fog that covered the earth, and the Egyptians actually had it figured out a little bit better. And even 1,000 years before the time of the Greeks, they really related the blooming of the flowers to the collection of honey. And why we know that for sure is there are stories that they wrote down that we can read. Well, it's written in hieroglyphics, but people have translated them for us. And they talk about the ancient Egyptian beekeepers putting boats out with colonies of bees on the boats, and starting in the south, where spring came earlier, and working their way along the Nile River as the flowers began to bloom sequentially with the seasons. So you'd park your boat for a couple of weeks. Then
With your bees.
With your bees, pull up the anchor and go a little further north, because now the first flowers were done blooming and the new flowers were coming in. And so they were doing migratory beekeeping along the Nile River with barges that had bees on them.
This is recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So not a myth.
Right.
Not a myth.
Yeah. And that area was a lot more green. Correct. It was
Yeah.
a couple thousand years.
Yeah, even further back than that, the Sahara was more like pasture land than
Right.
it is now. Yeah.
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 So the Nile must have been
Well,
very.
I think rain patterns were different, but also
some of the dust that
yeah,
got
when
blown over.
populations of people started to get larger, and they started grazing really heavily. And,
I see.
and pretty much destroyed a lot of
grasslands.
Yeah, that's what I understand. Yeah,
I see.
I hope that's not a myth too. So here's something.
We're spreading myths, as we're
Yeah,
breaking them.
We're breaking them and making them all at the same time. So I just wanted to kind of go back to the idea that you mentioned honey that was like 14 years old, and it was good. A little bit off because it had separated a bit. There was a little extra water in it.
Well, he had several buckets, and one of them was liquidy, but two of them were just all solid. It was just solid, but it was soft.
Yeah.
And it tasted fine.
Yeah, that would have been the best, I think.
Yeah, my mom actually, she said it tastes like honey from her childhood.
Oh, yeah.
And she's talking about honey from Georgia.
From Georgia.
Yeah.
Just outside
Back
of
to
Atlanta.
Georgia now, but yeah.
Just
But
out-
it just it was good honey. It was good honey.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was nothing off about it. It tasted good.
Right,
Yeah.
right. No, that's important. That's
Yeah.
really important to know. This is an interesting thing. The USDA did a study where they took honey from one tank and put it into 3 different jars. And one jar was kept in the dark and in the cool, like in a basement, with the lid sealed on it. Another one was kept in a pantry where the temperature would be like closer to room temperature, and in the basement it would be kind of chilly.
Right.
And yep. And then the last one was kept where it got a lot of sunlight during the day, like maybe on a table or whatever. And the purpose of that over a year was to see how much the honey would visually change. And honey darkens when it has a lot of sunlight hitting it.
Oh.
Yeah. So you want to keep honey in the dark. We talked a little earlier about how do you store honey. Well, the lid has to be on tightly so it doesn't absorb more moisture, but it should also be kept at a cooler temperature and should be kept in the dark. And so go ahead and describe the image that we've got up.
So we have we have an image of 3 different honey jars here that I think you just described, that they were all exposed to different elements. And one is still one. They're all different colors. So the darker one is the one that was exposed to sunlight.
That's right.
So it's almost like it was. It has more melanin in it.
Yeah,
or
it has
whatever.
a suntan.
Yeah, it has a suntan. And then the other one, it's just looks like it's pale compared to the ones and those one is not exposed sunlight.
And it's pretty much the way it was when it was tapped out of the container.
Right. And this is kind of now kind of another myth that, every time I sell honey, I have Middle Eastern people tell me that my honey's fake.
Oh.
Because my honey looks more like that.
Yeah, that's
and
just what they're used to.
They're used to more darker honey, which is also got to do with where it came from.
Right.
But there's also there's these different ways that they were telling me that they test if the honey was real. You know about these methods?
Tell me some.
So one of them is you take a little matchstick, the back of the matchstick, not the powder end, the wooden part, and you dip it in honey, and then you light the matchstick, and if it catches fire, it's fake. If it doesn't, it's real, which is total. It's glucose is glucose. It's gonna burn. Another one is like putting it on paper, and if the paper absorbs it, then it's fake. It's mixed with something. It's corn syrup. If it doesn't absorb it, then it's real honey or something like that. So they'll do this weird trick where they're moving a little ball of honey around. I don't know.
I never heard these.
Well, it's you've never really?
No.
If we could maybe find videos and stuff like that, but yeah, maybe that's the time. But I've always gotten this questions of people question me. They're like, your honey needs to be dark and liquid, but in North America, the more whiter the honey is, the more premium.
Right. And it gets a higher price around the world if it's lighter honey. The reason for that is a packer can make a nice blend of like a golden looking honey, and they can buy some darker honey and mix in a little bit of lighter honey and get that balanced color out of it.
People like that.
And obviously the people who are complaining about how light the honey is are just not used to the kind of flowers that the honey is made from here. So our honey is different. Canola, which is what most of Alberta's honey consists of.
And which is rapeseed, because I don't know why it's... Rapeseed kind of has a good reputation in Europe.
Right. They call it oilseed rape.
Yeah, and canola is like horrible or something now.
No.
Well, people consider it to be this like horrible GMO thing.
Oh, but it's not a GMO product. Canola and canola oil are this is a whole nother day's topic. But no, I want to answer your question because I don't want to leave people wondering. And
it is important.
And canola got its name from Canadian. The canola, Canadian oil, and what it is it's regular rapeseed contains an acid that can be really harmful, and in very large quantities. It basically, if you were to eat the oil from pure canola, pure rapeseed, it's not anywhere near as safe or as healthy for a person. So what the scientists did in the 70s in Canada was they irradiated seeds, and that will cause some genetic mutations.
Okay.
And then they planted the mutated seeds and found some that were much lower in this type of acid that would have been in the oil.
So you can make it into cooking oil.
So they could make it into cooking oil. Okay. So GMO to me means that you splice in something from another creature. You can make your canola oil glow in the dark if you take a few genes from a type of sea fish that glows in the dark and stick it in there. So that wasn't done, but what they did is they tried to accelerate the rate of mutations, because you could get the same result if you had years and years to spend and kept looking for the offspring that was a little better and a little better and a little better, but you could speed up that process by damaging or mutating the seeds once and then picking out through them. Okay, so that's a little off topic, but what I wanted to show here is the fact that honey can stay good for a long time, or it can darken and it can separate, and you can get different amounts of moisture in it and sucked out of the atmosphere, and then it becomes something that isn't so good anymore. When the King's Tut's tomb was first opened back in 1922, the idea then was that we're just going to poke around and look at everything, and the story came out that the chief archaeologist had opened up a jar inside of the tomb and stuck a spoon in and ate some honey that was as good as new. Well, that's an enduring myth, and I thought, there probably is some truth to it somewhere. So what I did is one of my favorite bee authors is Dr. Ava Crane. So she was at first a nuclear physicist, and it was right after World War II when the atomic bomb was dropped on the Japanese, and she decided she didn't want to be a nuclear physicist anymore because she felt that she was contributing to that particular branch of science in a way that it could be abused. So she, when she got married, her husband and her were given a hive of bees, and she just became totally infatuated with bees. She ended up writing about a dozen books and doing the kind of research on every topic everywhere. She traveled all over the world. So Ava Crane is this really renowned scientist who really got to know everything that there is to know about bees and honey, and I just really liked her way of looking. So I'm going to read something here, just take a minute, but what she wrote in a book of hers called A Book of Honey is that the shelf life of honey is sometimes quoted commercially as 2.5 years. Now, did you know that's what the typical packers will say, that even in the days before you had to put expiration dates on everything, they would just basically tell the shopkeepers, don't keep it around for more than a couple of years, because it'll start to get differentially granulated. If it were liquid, it'll look funny. So you try to get it sold. Okay, but Ava Crane writes that honey does not go bad as many foods do. It is still wholesome after decades. And Bidzina, you can.
Yeah, it was 14 years, maybe even longer, and who knows when his grandpa had processed that, because he passed away, so it could have been like 5 years prior to that.
Yeah,
you're not going to do it on your deathbed. I'm sure he's not processing, or no.
Maybe that's where he died, extracting. I mean. Maybe the crop was short that year, and anyway, or maybe it was really huge and he had to work too hard. All respect for the gentleman beekeeper. He produced some good honey. You're eating it 20 years later.
My friend wants me to put bees there actually now.
Okay,
but in Sundry, it's 1 hour away.
Yeah, that's good. And that's a good area. That's a good area in Alberta for bees.
Yeah,
and there is less canola in that area even now. More bears because you're closer to the mountains.
Yeah,
so that'll be.
The honey was good. So 14 years, and Eva Garnay.
Yeah, Crane. So Ava Crane, then she said she had tasted samples of 20-year-old honey, but the fine flavors had gone, and what was left was nondescript sweetness, less than that of fresh honey because of a greater proportion of maltose. So honey is typically mostly fructose and glucose in pretty close to equal amounts. The honey started out as sucrose at once upon a time inside the plant, and a sucrose molecule is complex. It's a disaccharide. If you split it apart with an enzyme, you can get two types of sugar, one being fructose and one being glucose. And it differentially breaks down depending on what kind of flower it came from. So some honey has more fructose than glucose, and that honey is particularly sweet. We have an old-time beekeeper here in where we are in Calgary who told me that he had traveled into Florida and he tasted some of the Tupelo honey, and he said it was totally fake. And it's, in his mind, it was. It was very similar to what your acquaintances had told you about the light honey from Alberta being fake. Well, he thought this darker honey, slightly darker honey, coming out of the Apalachicola River in Florida, where they produce a few tens of millions of pounds of Tupelo honey. The Tupelo honey is really, really high in fructose. And fructose is twice as sweet as glucose. So if you have honey that's high in fructose, it's noticeably sweeter. You taste a spoonful of it, and it's, wow, this is sweet. Yeah.
So just kind of a percentage breakdown. So it's 70 to 80% fructose and glucose.
Right.
So what's the break? So depending on the honey, it can be more fructose and more glucose.
You got it.
And which one's the sweet one?
Fructose.
Fructose is the sweet one.
Yeah.
And the natural sugars are what? They're glucose or just the white sugar.
The white sugar is sucrose.
White sugar is sucrose.
Yes.
So they're all like some sort of glucose.
Yeah. That all means sugars of different sorts. So
it's a different type of sugar.
It's a different type of sugar. And when a plant creates sugar, it is like a tree with sap going up from the roots. That's a sugar. And we tap the maple syrup.
Right.
If you analyze maple syrup, it will be 99% sucrose because no bee has converted it into glucose and fructose. Okay. So the bee has to add enzymes to the sucrose and break the molecule down. So if you could picture this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my hands up, so two fists, and these are stuck together, and that's a sucrose molecule.
Right.
And then you have an enzyme, and that'll be my head, comes along and bangs into it and splits it apart. Now you have fructose and glucose, and they are structurally almost identical, but just slightly built, just a very slightly bit differently. So now you have two monosaccharides, like simple sugars. Okay. And that's why honey is better for you.
Yeah. So the body would process it differently.
Yeah, it's processed and it's better for you to eat. Okay.
Sorry, just to finish. So it's 17 to 20% water.
Yeah.
And then 3 to 10%. Other, which is enzymes, minerals, vitamins. I don't know what vitamins, so probably very trace amounts.
Trace amounts, very small.
Amino acids, pollen, and organic acids.
Right.
So that's,
And that percentage.
And sugar is all so that's why honey's better.
Yeah. And those things you just named, the minerals and the vitamins and so on, they're there in honey. And there are more minerals in darker honey. That's why it's darker in color. Because the plant has pulled out more minerals out of the soil and put it into the nectar.
From the pollen or whatever.
From the roots and from the soil.
I see.
Yeah, and it processes it a little differently inside the plant.
Nectar itself is different.
The nectar itself is slightly different because of the mineral content, and that makes the honey look darker.
I see.
But she also mentions the greater proportion of maltose. Now, maltose is like the sugar that you would make with beer. Like it's sometimes called the beer sugar. And that sugar is not very sweet. It's like far less sweet. And some honey will naturally convert, just naturally. Some of the sugars that are there will turn into this more complicated maltose, and with time. So the longer honey sets, the more maltose it will accumulate just as a natural chemical process, so the honey won't be as sweet. So some of the fructose, some of the glucose has converted itself over time into like the molecules just kind of recombine and kind of cluster together and become this complicated maltose, which is not very sweet. Here's something else that she said, and I'll read this too. So Ava Crane again. This is from the World History of Beekeeping and Honey Hunting. Oh, I have these books here. Actually, I kind of. So this is the book of honey. It's a slender little book. It's in my library at home. It's one of my favorites, and one of my less favorite ones is another book. By Dr. Ava Crane, and it weighs about 40 pounds, and it's the World History of Beekeeping, and it's, I think, about 1,000 pages, and it's one of the dozen or so books that she wrote. Heavy, isn't it? Yeah. Surprisingly. So in that book, The World History of Beekeeping and Honey Hunting, Ava Crane wrote that there have been several dramatic reports of finding honey in ancient tombs. Now, note she uses the word dramatic. So yeah, it's dramatic, all right. But analysis has not always established that the substance found was honey. Sometimes archaeologists have mistaken castor oil for honey. So, what's castor oil? It's a natural oil from the castor bean. Like there's olive oil, canola oil, so there's castor bean oil. Okay. So they thought it was castor oil. They thought it was honey, but it was actually castor oil. They would know that by doing chemical analysis. A jar stamped stuff, I like that word stuff, STPH. Now that's what she used. I don't have any clue of what that means. It's probably an Egyptian word for honey. But a jar stamped stuff from King Tut's tomb from 1340 BCE probably contained honey, although too little remained in the jar to allow for confirmation. Typically, the honey had deteriorated, but likely it was honey because they based that on the pollen analysis. So if you got some goo in a jar and it has high sugar content and has pollen in it, there aren't too many things it could be from, except from honey. So that's where that came from.
So the word stuff. I don't know if this is the same word, but supposedly it's a shortened word for staphylococcus.
Oh, staphylococcus?
Yeah, which refers to a bacteria.
Yeah, no. The ancient Egyptians wouldn't have known about bacteria. So they wouldn't have stamped the honey jar. I like calling it just stuff, as if it were STUFF, stuff. But I have no. It's just a word that she used, and I didn't bother to look it up yet. Okay, so we've established that honey is good and will keep a long time, but probably not from the Egyptian tombs. So what about honey as a superfood? And this, to me, I saw this yesterday on.
We have about 15 more minutes that we can go for.
Okay. Yeah. We can talk much more faster. I'll do my best to push ourselves through this because there are a couple more topics, but this one is a cool one too. So this was on, I think it was on X, previously known as Twitter, and here's some things. Somebody says honey is great because there are live enzymes in honey. What do you think? True, not true?
I thought that was the case.
Okay, so enzymes are never alive.
Oh, okay.
They're just a catalyst, a chemical.
I see.
So they're not alive. They're like a molecule.
Okay.
All right.
So this is going to be like a speed round of myths being broken?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
When in contact with a metal spoon, these enzymes die. Do you think the enzymes die?
No.
Okay. Because they were never alive.
That's a myth. Metal, because sometimes they come with those wooden stuff.
Yeah.
And my mom was actually freaking out. She's like, I'm just like, why? Like, you're telling a beekeeper that, I don't know, I was getting honey out of the jar with the metal spoon, and she's like, you're ruining the honey.
Aw. Well, maybe there's a difference, but, if we eat enough junk food maybe smoke some stuff and eat some chips.
It's probably
this difference of having,
this is not going to do anything.
That's right.
All right.
And also you have to think, okay, we manufacture a plastic spoon. Like, what did that do to our atmosphere? And when we could use a wooden one or even a metal one, which will last for generations, much longer than a plastic spoon will last. Honey contains a substance. It helps your brain work better. Now, of course, this list doesn't say what substance. And when I read that, I thought, yeah, it does have a substance. That substance is called sugar. So how does your brain work without sugar? Honey is one of the rare foods on earth that alone can sustain human life.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah. What do you
It has
think?
a little protein, right?
It's missing protein.
Oh, okay.
Almost zero protein in
Okay.
honey. Probably zero. You can say zero honey. Zero protein. 1 teaspoon of honey is enough to sustain human life for 24 hours. That could also be called fasting. I mean, we can sustain human life for 24 hours whether we eat the honey or not. And we need about 1,000 calories as a minimum to get through a day. I mean, you're almost comatose. Like, you got to have 1,000 calories to stay alive every day. And a teaspoon of honey is 21 calories. So you're going to need 50 teaspoons to get enough food, energy,
Right.
Calories. Okay, I don't need to go through the rest of this. We did talk about
Expiration. No, there's no.
Yeah.
It does have an expiration date. What is I guess the commercial
It's a
date
recommendation.
is 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But
I understand that in some countries they do have to put an expiration date on the
Just for,
jar.
law or regular.
just for law. And you know what? The packers, I would think, aren't too upset with that, because I know so many people that will take perfectly good food and toss it out because the expiration date was yesterday. And they figure, it's expired. Now, milk, of course, throw it out when it's 2 or 3 days past the expiration date.
Fruit
But,
or mold.
some fruits, things that are moldy.
Yeah.
You smell it. But some people will throw out the honey, and then that means you have to go out and buy more honey. It expired.
So it's not really of a perishable item, honey.
No, it's not a perishable item.
Yeah.
And there are preppers, people who are waiting for the
that's
apocalypse and so on.
why. Yeah, I haven't actually talked about that, but that was a big reason why I got into beekeeping.
Yeah. So you'd have something to eat.
Yeah. And I also am like, everybody wants a beekeeper on their team.
Yeah.
If we were ever to go to Mars, I can't be a scientist. I can't be a doctor.
Cool.
But
that would be so cool.
Well, they need they need one of each, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's so talking about how good honey is, it's good partly because the sugar, sucrose, was broken into glucose and fructose, not because it has these minerals and stuff. So I did a calculation. This is my own work, but on an average day, if we use just potassium as an example, you have to have about 500. You need 3,500 milligrams of potassium in a day. And if you want to get all of your potassium by eating honey, you'd have to eat 17 kilos of honey in one day. So every day you have to eat 17 kilos of honey to get your potassium that your body requires. You can do that with like magnesium. You need a small amount of magnesium, 400 milligrams of magnesium every day. You're going to have to eat 21 kilos. A kilo, that's 2.5, that's 50 pounds of honey to get enough of your potassium and your magnesium. And then look at the vitamins. If you want to get all of your vitamin C by eating honey, you still have to eat 5 kilos. That's 10 pounds of honey in a day, every day, to get enough vitamin C. So it's there. These they call them trace elements for a reason. They're there, but in very, very, very small amounts. So when it comes to being healthy, eat honey. You can ask an expert. They certainly will be able to tell you. Let's talk about smokers just for a few minutes. I think this is where we'll wrap up. So people smoke bees. Do you wrap them up in a piece of paper and light the end of it?
They don't. I haven't seen that, but I've seen a video in I think it was Switzerland, where a guy, he has those sheds
Yeah.
where they do beekeeping pretty
Yeah.
much indoors.
Yeah,
They have a
yeah.
drawer. So he goes in this shed. He's going to do his beekeeping stuff, and he has a special cigar that he uses as a smoker. He's not inhaling, but he has a cigar in his mouth and
Yeah.
using it to smoke the bees. So that was his form of smoking the bees. But
Yeah.
normally people use an actual smoker. But
Yeah.
but it's essentially you're literally, are you getting them high, or are they or what's going on here? What
Yeah, I don't know if they get high in the same way that a mammal would.
they get intoxicated or they get inebriated or
That's a good question. What is going on there? So you know, we all use a bee smoker from time to time. I sometimes can sneak in and out of a couple hives in the backyard on a nice bright day, working slowly and easily. I can work them and do some checking without lighting a smoker, and I like to do that.
Yeah.
But I also will light a smoker when I have a little more work that I need to do, like digging deeper into a colony. So I use a typical smoker. That's a metal box that you put stuff in to burn. And I guess you could be burning the Swiss cigars, or you could be burning. I had a friend whose favorite stuff, he didn't always get it, but it was dried cow patties, cow manure.
yeah,
And-
that's right. Yeah,
Yep. And he would smoke that. I don't know if he told his honey customers that the honey had been touched by this extra odor, but
burlap is popular.
burlap
Yeah.
is something
Yeah.
that I actually use myself. I used to use baler twine until the farmers started to chemically treat the baler twine. They had to treat it because mice would start chewing on the twine, and that taught the mice not to chew. At least that's the myth
Right,
that I was
right.
told by farmers.
Right.
Yeah. So anyhow, bee smoker. So most people think that smoke makes bees sleepy or high or something, but it's not exactly accurate. So the website that I saw that I pulled this from says this: the smoke actually masks bees' alarm pheromones. Smoke causes bees to prepare to leave their hive because they believe it is on fire. So they eat a lot of honey to get ready to go.
Right.
When they're busy eating, then they're too busy to sting.
They get too heavy
And they get too heavy, so they
Yeah.
can't use their stinger as well.
Right.
And that's because the theory is they're getting ready to leave.
Yeah.
Now, bees can't.
Which is a myth.
That's a myth. That's the
That's
myth
right.
we want to break.
'Kay.
So do you know what the word absconding means? Ever seen that or heard that? It's sometimes
No.
used in bees. Okay. It's pretty rare, but absconding is when a colony has something wrong with it and the bees all leave.
Okay.
So absconding is one of the ways that the Africanized bee moves so quickly through Brazil and then Venezuela and then up through Central America, because the small colonies would sometimes face a period of bad weather and everybody would just pack up and leave. And we
Right.
call that absconding. Okay?
It's like that Tolstoy quote with the Moscow.
Yeah, like Moscow on fire, you
Yeah.
pack up and go.
Yeah.
So they may pack up and go if they're desperate, if they're diseased, if they have really bad foul brood. It's possible for some of the remaining bees to just leave because they can't survive where they are. That's absconding. They do not abscond during a fire. So these pictures were given to me we're looking at some pictures now, folks, and this is in southern Australia, not too far from Melbourne, and I have some friends there. The Kirkpatricks, they have it's a family business, a honey farm, and a couple of years ago, they had severe fires. That was in 2019, and the fires swept through several of their apiaries.
Just a burnt.
It just burned everything. And the result of all that fire was the bees stayed and died. And I've never heard of bees ever leaving a hive because it's on fire. They don't do that. They stay. They try to blow the flame out of the hive with their little wings, but once it catches on fire, they sit there.
There was a case, I don't know, a couple of years back where there was a huge volcano eruption with
Yeah.
beehives, and it
Yeah.
got covered with
It was
ash.
on the Canary Islands.
Yeah, and then 50 days later, they uncovered the bees were still alive.
Yeah, they stayed.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
They stayed in there.
Underneath all the volcano ash, they
Yeah.
managed to
I
survive.
remember that. Like, how in the world did they do that?
I don't know. Well, I guess it's just like snowfall. if they had honey storage, and it's hard to suffocate
As long as it
them.
wasn't too hot. Like it was the ash then.
Yeah,
The-
the ash covered them, and it acts as insulation. Coal's a great
Right.
insulator.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's right. They don't leave.
They don't leave. They stay
Yeah.
there and burn. So that's not what's happening when we smoke the bees.
Yeah.
It's not that they're filling up their bellies in order to flee.
Yeah.
There's some work that I think maybe was done at University at Cornell University in New York State, United States, where they kind of figure that maybe in a hollow tree, the fire starts at the bottom and the bees will gather up as much honey as they can and then work their way higher into the tree in order to have something left over.
Right.
But anyhow, the bottom line, something I did find was this is good. BBC, they hit it on like the public broadcaster, but they were right. They got the story correct. And what they basically said is that the smoke interferes with the sense of smell that the bees have, and that's
they can't
the key.
communicate.
That's the main thing. They can't communicate. So that kind of brings us through half a dozen myths.
Yeah.
And we created some new ones today. So the story goes on.
No, it does go on, and join us next week where we'll be talking about Tolstoy.
Yeah, a bit about Tolstoy.
And some philosophy and
and about robbing, like bee robbing, like when honeybees
hive
go.
societies and
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun too. Okay.
all right. You're like it's like that anchor Ron Burgundy. Take it away, Ron. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't seen it. You're much more cultured than I am. I'll say that.
You gotta check that one out.
Okay.
You'll like it.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Finished.
Thank you. Well, both of us, we're really, really, really glad that you're listening to the About Bees and Culture and Curiosity podcast and vidcast, and the series is going to go on with a lot more interesting stories, just like what we've had today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.